more than a year, we've explored the racial division impacting our country during the Our Race reality series.
I'm Bill Anderson, and although we have addressed multiple topics, one recurring question is of allies.
Show your support. Stand here with your son.
People who genuinely care about improving discrimination that may not directly impact them, what can they do? So tonight, we look into the impact of action for allies. They come from different backgrounds, represent different races, and have numerous experiences.
You hear that Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, and it's like, well, actually, it depends on who you are and where you're from, and both can be true.
Aaron Smith, Charles Gallagher are local university professors.
When you say it's like, do we not know each other, not like each other, it could be a little bit of both. We don't like each other because we don't know each other, and we don't know each other because we're segregated.
Michelle Sahane and Melissa DePino formed From Privilege to Progress after watching the very public arrest of young black men basically waiting for a meeting in a local Starbucks.
This felt like this could be my brother, this could be my father, my cousin.
I know enough to know that this happens every day. I'd never actually physically seen it. I just thought something has to be done about this.
Allie Michael, among other things, trains people to address racism in schools.
As a white person, I need to figure out the way racism lives in me so that I can fight against it and so that I can, for lack of a better word, confess it.
Black Lives Matter, and everyone's not getting treated the right way.
And Katie and Chris Ziemba are both administrators in local schools that I met after their 7-year-old son helped plan a Black Lives Matter march.
Jackson was talking about when he got older what he would do. So we talked a little bit about the Children's Crusades, and he said he wanted to have a march, so there it was.
Unique perspectives, but the common thread is they're all aware of the racial obstacles we face. They're all committed to making a difference, and they all realize that working together, it's the only way towards real change.
It immediately became clear that when you start discussing the role of white people as it relates to racial division, that role can best be described as evolving. So how do you get involved in a way that is productive without being overbearing?
My first year in college, I heard this quote from James Baldwin, and he says, essentially, racism's not a people of color problem, it's a white person problem, and it's not going to change until white people do something about it. And when I first heard that, it was like a wake-up call that this is actually my problem. This is something I need to do something about.
People that look like me can talk about it all day, can talk about racism and educate people and explain to people, but it's the people who hold the power and the privilege who really have the chance to actually do something great in history right now.
I think the most important role of white people is to do the inner work, because the only way that we get to this is when each individual looks inside and understands what their race means.
The activist mindset of the people we spoke to led us to expect them to all be engaged in the process of addressing racism and discrimination. But I admit, I was honestly a little surprised by the agreement over the importance of white America's role.
You know, when people ask what's the role, I'm like, the starring role, the main role is your role to fix what you as a people, as a nation, or as nations have created. So I always welcome allyship and participation.
There's a constant question of, am I doing enough? Am I listening to the right people? Should I be more quiet? And should I be creating space for others? And where's the line in all that? And I think it's a daily reflection, and some days you get it right, and some days you don't, and reflect on how you can do better the next time.
It's really something that a lot of white people really don't want to have a reckoning with, because you know, the word white privilege seems to anger people, and a lot of whites would say, well, I've never been privileged personally, and that could very well be true.
Allies being involved was pretty universally accepted. What that means, that was a deeper discussion.
Nobody wants to be performative. We want to make sure that we are both listening and also leading for change, and so I think it's, you know, it looks like having those difficult conversations with families and friends all of the time. And it's finding the way to be a true ally and like really connecting with folks across different lines to ensure that you are supporting the work moving forward.
It's just something for all of us to remain committed to doing. You could say that I am always working towards allyship, But to self-proclaim yourself an ally, it doesn't necessarily even mean that you are even doing the work. I consider I'm the Queen of England, but it doesn't make it true.
There are a couple action steps that white people can take to make things better. One is realize that racism is our problem and begin to figure out what that means.
So this is the path to being an ally. It's confusing, it can be difficult, but if we're sincere about improving societies, it's necessary.
The idea that I am contributing to people not being able to fully be themselves, not having the same opportunities that I have because I'm staying silent and I'm just opting out because I have the opportunity to, that's not something I'm willing to live with, and it really shouldn't be something that any white person is willing to live with.
I like to say that race is not a zero-sum game, but racism is. This is not us against them or me against you. These are people against unjust systems and policies.
A lot of things in life, there's black and white and there's gray, and I think being an ally, like, you have to choose a side. I don't think there's gray there, right? You're either racist or anti-racist. There's no in between.
So if we agree that changing society requires us to work together, what exactly does that mean for allies, and how do we come together in an often divided society?
Most of the people that we spoke to recognize that solving the issues of racial injustice, it's not something that minorities can accomplish on our own. We need allies of all races. But be clear, wanting the white community involved does not mean it's an easy thing for them to do.
Whatever places you have privilege in your life, that is an opportunity. It's not an accusation. It's not an insult. It's an opportunity. So that's why we say use your privilege for progress.
I'm 44, and I never remember growing up racism being a partisan issue. Everyone's against racism. But I think as I'm getting older and being forced to reckon with my responsibility, that's when the difficulty comes out. And I think for a lot of people, that push to do something that's actually going to impact racism in our country, that's where we kind of stall out.
Black Lives Matter!
They're all involved in addressing racism in America in various ways, which means they've all experienced the challenges that come with just trying to be an ally.
Sadly, it gets used in political rhetoric all the time. That who is your enemy, right? It's not low wages, it's Mexicans, right? So who is the enemy, basically? What should you be scared of? Young black men, right? So the narrative basically, politically, becomes basically for a lot of whites that these groups are basically taking things away from you, or they're the cause of the problem.
I would like to play for the family.
So once you invite people in, you're not the enemy. No one learns from being insulted. So this isn't about blaming people and making people feel guilty. It's about saying, hey, you might not have known this, but your experience with said institution, whether it's a school system or engaging with law enforcement, it hasn't been mine. And we can both be telling the truth.
It's horrifying to be called racist. I understand how much it scares people, but for me, I think about Ibram Kendi's words. He says that essentially denial is the heartbeat of racism and confession is the heartbeat of anti-racism.
And as Dr. Ali points out, denial is a big part of the racial issues we face as a society, and perhaps the biggest opportunity for allies to speak to others in their circle.
I realized as a parent that, like, sometimes a family member might say something and my kids were there, and if I didn't say something, then I was sending the message to my child that this was okay, right? That in many ways, like, I was complicit with these ideas. And so I'm in those situations probably a lot more than you are, right? And so making sure that I'm not silent, that I don't take those that I take every opportunity and I don't let it just slide by.
It's really important that people who want to be considered allies are in relationships with people who are growing with them and learning with them, and you are cultivating relationships where people are able to call you out and help you continue to grow and learn, because this is a lifelong process.
And sometimes they shared that acknowledging that process by simply acknowledging history and our different experiences, as difficult as it may be, it can be eye-opening.
It isn't yesterday. It's not 50 years ago, it's really 100 years ago in terms of wealth accumulation. And that's a kind of painful pill for some whites to swallow, because then what you're saying is that the playing field was never level, right? That the system was rigged for one group.
As a racial optimist, I think that education is critical. And I think when people know the truth, typically, we're hardwired to empathize with other people when they cry, when they're in pain. And when people really open their eyes or have their eyes open to the realities of racial inequality, I think most people, say that's not fair.
And that leads us to the two things that came up more than anything else when they were asked the most important issues in joining with racial minorities to address our societal racial divide. First, listen.
After George Floyd was murdered this summer, all over the country, in almost every sphere, people of color, particularly Black people, were saying to their alma maters and their schools and their workplaces, like, this is what we need from you. And this is what we're going through, listen. And I really think that if we could actually listen to those voices, the actions that we need to take would be clear.
I don't have the lived experience of racism in America in the same way that you do. And if I'm not listening, I don't know how to be an ally.
And after listening, try to remember that we're all in this together.
It's possible, but it takes political courage, and it takes Americans to realize that everyone doing better is better for all of us.
Racism hurts everyone, and until we can work together to fix it, then we're all going to continue to be hurt.
At this point in our history, if we look at it honestly, we can say, you know what, despite everything we've been through, let's talk. Let's work together. You know what I mean? Like, we've tried everything else.
Now, they all recognize the need for allies in the fight for racial justice, but what are the action steps? And are we, in fact, making progress?
Now, as the title of this special indicates, we're focusing on action for allies. And so far, I think we're pretty clear on the allies part. Now, what about the action?
We are modeling the conversation. We're modeling how to have a conversation, a productive conversation about race. And I feel like it's exactly what people need to see.
My hope is that extends more broadly. My hope is that in some way it can be an agent for change, like that we can be some part of this puzzle, like a minor piece, but a part of the puzzle to spark greater change in our country right now.
What does it take to unite a society and address racial division?
What you would not want to happen to you, that I feel the exact same way. And I think a lot of the confusion around these issues is that inability to see yourself in the other. Because once I see myself in somebody else, oh, it makes perfect sense.
What is fair? If you didn't know that you were going to be born Black or brown or white or Asian, or you're going to be rich or poor, what would you want the world to look like? If you're going to be plopped down in one of these groups, rich or poor, Black or white, what would make the world more equitable?
The concept of equality is pretty basic and easy enough to grasp for most, but what we found was a major challenge, was getting people, even willing allies for change, to accept their shared responsibility for our current society and move past abstract ideas into personal reflection.
It's really important that people can see that and see two people modeling that so they can have the inspiration, the motivation to understand that they can learn these things. It's not impossible. It doesn't always have to be uncomfortable, although you are going to get uncomfortable.
White people, don't listen to or believe Black people about their lived experience. They don't think that it's possible to happen unprovoked. But once you start learning and paying attention, then you see it everywhere and you're able to be part of the solution.
And if done the right way, then allies tell us that owning responsibility for helping address a racial divide, that's not the same thing as being personally blamed for it.
It feels like a moral injury. Like I'm trying so hard to do right and you're telling me I'm hurting somebody and that's not what I want. And so I revert to like fighting it, like, that's not true, or show me your proof, or running away from it, like, well, I knew I shouldn't have been in this job anyway.
Who taught you these things are your teachers, your parents. So there's an intimate connection to some of this misinformation and some of this delusion that makes people feel as though it's an attack on who they are and not on a system that they may have benefited from without knowing how unequal it serves someone else.
So if we can take a breath and move beyond the fight, flight, freeze response and just listen and remain in empathetic connection, then the steps will be clear.
And as we share these discussions and recognize that they can be, should be, and are mutually beneficial, then the need for action for allies, it becomes even more clear.
I'm not doing it for anybody. I'm doing it with people because this is a human issue. This is an issue of being able to live in a world where everybody feels respected and seen and heard and valued for what they bring and who they are.
So even as we understand our common goals, there are still things that keep us divided. So let's give everyone one last chance to address any additional lingering concerns.
I see it personally as a white male as my responsibility, given my privilege as a white male and the need to change systemic structures to ensure we are moving this along. White people definitely have a role to play.
Personal analysis and reflection, it's not an easy thing to do, especially with topics as divisive as race relations. But we found encouragement in the outlook of people committed to social change.
I'm optimistic, but at the same time, I'm going to say stay with us and don't stop.
They all want to see society more united. They're encouraged, but they also know that overcoming a racial divide, that can take time.
No one has ever not been doing this work. We are just continuing it. And people are going to continue doing this work until we have reached our goal. So it's just a matter of time, maybe not in my lifetime, maybe not in my children's lifetime, but eventually I do think that our wildest dreams are going to come true.
But to reach those dreams could take multiple generations and difficult conversations, sometimes even in our own families.
If we want to change the world, then our kids need to know what the world is and what it's like, and they need to be aware so that they can start making their own choices.
I grew up in a neighborhood where people told racist jokes all the time, where they used racist and sensitive language. And I guess when I was 12, I thought it was funny. I didn't understand the hurt, the damage it's done. But we know better now, you know, that we know that these words are offensive, and the sooner a child knows that, the better, because it empowers them to stand up.
To make things better may require taking a moment to address our fears of backlash or so-called cancel culture and try to walk in another's shoes.
That fear that I have of being called out, of being canceled, of getting it wrong, is actually the same fear that people of color feel in our society every day when they are just like trying to do their job, trying to walk down the street, trying to take their kid to school. And so there's room for connection there. There's room for empathy building there.
But at the end of the day, as discouraging as our divided society may be sometimes, we need to remember that working together is always the path to being better.
But I think when you look back, the long arc of history, I think, it bends toward justice. And I think over time, we've witnessed that having optimism and having faith and continuing to struggle despite not being able to see the finish line, it pays off.
We've done several specials, but in a lot of ways, this one was the most eye-opening for me personally, because it forced me to do what we've been asking you to do: listen to and try to understand perspectives different from our own. I enjoyed that learning process, and I hope you did as well. I'm Bill Anderson. Thank you for watching, and have a good one.